while I was waiting in the kitchen, just before coming up on stage here, I was reading that newspaper. Students of the University of Amsterdam are offered cuddling sessions with puppies to cope with pre-exam stress. I'm sorry, I'm from the UvA. So, stress is on the rise among students. 3 out of 4 students feel emotionally exhausted. 1 out of 4 students suffers a burnout, and 1 out of 5 students is affected by anxiety and depression. And common causes among students of stress include, first of all, the changing of the environment, because students move from the parents to a vibrant, interesting city. Secondly, dating with new girlfriends and boyfriends. Third, meeting new people, so that means social stress and peer pressure. Time management, because they need to organize all of this. And then finally, studying with the fear of failure. And I always thought of school, university, as a wondrous time of unique opportunities and absolute freedom to explore new ideas and to find one's true self. So, what has happened in the Netherlands? Why are our students so anxious and depressed? Are we anxious to learn? Is learning making us anxious? What is learning? Learning is acquiring new knowledge, new skills, or new values. For example, I may learn about the law of gravity. I may learn cycling or sailing. Or I may learn, for example, a new social competence like collaborating with other people. Yes, ladies, for males typically like me, collaboration requires learning. Learning is acquiring new knowledge, new skills, and new values. Otherwise, it wouldn't be learning. Learning reveals what I don't know, what I can't do, what I have not yet experienced. So, by definition, learning is always overwhelming and surprising. And because learning is new and surprising, I feel incompetent. Learning reveals that I have to deal with uncertainty, that I need to take risks. I feel inexperienced. Learning is annoying. And if you like learning, then you're learning something you already know. Learning should be annoying. The more you struggle, the more you learn. And the bigger the challenges, the more happy you will feel afterwards. But learning itself is unpleasant, and that's why it's usually based on pain and on coercion. In learning, I'm constantly confronted with my own failures. Learning is very scary because during learning, I change. Through learning, I become a different person. The world transforms. Each time you learn, you will either grow or you will shrink. So how does learning affect our person? How does it change our world and our person? Well, it does through understanding. Do you know the difference between knowing and understanding? Knowing is passive. Understanding is active. Knowing is adding information to my mind, to my brain, Understanding is processing that information in my mind and in my brain. Knowing isn't really affecting me emotionally, but understanding makes me happy or sad. Of course, you need to know to understand, but then again, you may know everything, but understand nothing. Understanding requires a commitment, a readiness, an eagerness to change. It takes me 1 second to know that death ends life, but a lifetime to understand. Women know all about relationships, but still, they do not understand man. And men know all about sex, but they do not understand women and men. And actually, I don't think they understand and know sex either. Understanding is enjoyable because we may predict the world. When I really understand the law of gravity, I know that every apple on earth will go down. When I understand my wife, I know that she will be very, very angry when I forget picking up the kids at school at 4 p.m. Only when you have changed, you have understood. But it takes an effort. Learning is like running a marathon. I mean, in the beginning, before you start, you're overwhelmed, you're surprised, because it's too difficult, you won't make it. And then, by coercion of others, you start running. But it's hurting, it's a lot of pain, hours of struggling, of being uncertain, because you don't know whether you will make it. And then finally, in the end, you're overwhelmed and surprised again, because you made it, and you feel this seconds, minutes of intense pleasure. Learning is hours and hours of pain and struggle for just a few seconds of understanding. But if you finish, it will change you for life. So how does the mind learn? The mind learns through errors. We learn by making mistakes. Every time I face something new in the world, I do not approach it unbiased. I already have an opinion in my mind. I predict the world. I anticipate what will happen, because people dream. Young girls have imagined their wedding 1,000 times. Young boys have driven their sports cars hundreds of hours. Mothers have caressed their beautiful children, non-existing. And writers have written their successful books 1,000 times. We constantly predict the future. Even very small, tiny daily things are anticipated. For example, suppose that I'm hungry and I crave for food. Then I imagine this juicy, tasty hamburger. Based on my previous experience and on my perception of external cues, I create the image of a perfect hamburger. But there is a problem. Because my prediction is not quite accurate, an error will occur. There will be a difference between my predicted hamburger and the actual real hamburger. And that difference is what we call the prediction error. With the prediction error, the brain learns. The ultimate goal of learning is to predict accurately the future by eliminating the prediction error, either by adapting my anticipation or by changing my behavior. For example, go to another restaurant. The better that your anticipation matches reality, the more you have learned. And the better you can predict, the more successful you will be in your life. The success of McDonald's is not that they make very tasty hamburgers. The success of McDonald's is their accurate predictability. All over the world, in every country, in every restaurant, McDonald's serves the same shit, lousy cheeseburger. But we love it because we're in control. My imagination matches reality, always. Human beings prefer the dullness of control above the magic of surprise. So how does the brain learn? We know the brain correlates of these prediction errors. It's dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter because it transmits information from one brain area to another brain area. And dopamine signals the difference between my expected reward and the actual reward. So, for example, when the actual hamburger is much more tastier than the one I predicted, dopamine in the brain will rise, it will go up. When the actual hamburger is much worse than the one I predicted, dopamine will go down. And when the actual hamburger perfectly matches my anticipated hamburger, nothing will happen. Dopamine will stay the same. And I don't learn anything. But when dopamine rises, I feel happy, and it drives motivation positively to go for another hamburger. When dopamine drops, I feel sad, and it drives my emotion negatively to avoid the previous one. And in both cases, I learn, and it will change my behavior. So, let's try to learn something here right now, all of us. Let's do a very short experiment. Let's have a look at this picture. How do you feel? It's allowed to say something. Could someone comment? What are you seeing here? Water. Does it look nice? Is it? Who would like to have a swim in this water? Raise your hands. Hi, hi, hi. Yes. Thank you. The others can't swim over there. It's water, it's calm, it's blue, right? Okay. Let's have a look at the second picture. So how do you feel now? Can someone comment, please? You're scared? Good. Someone else? You want to know what's under it? Probably a shark. Okay. Now let's have a look at the third picture. How do you feel now? Who would like to have a swim? So what has changed? Have we learned something? Yes. The sea has changed. This third picture is exactly the same as this first picture, but still it feels very different. We suspect something beneath the water. We have a more accurate idea of the world. Now we understand why all these people here on the beach don't go for a swim. And even without the shark, I still anticipate the shark. Our brains are anticipation machines, learning engines. And what they do is constantly looking for accurate predictions of the world by eliminating errors. First, we imagine the world, fueled by our internal desires and external cues. Secondly, we use our perception to compare the external reality with my top-down imagination. And third, I use that knowledge to understand the world. It means that I'm capable of building longer existing networks of knowledge to predict accurately the world that will evolve over time. Understanding is predicting. And by coincidence, I have learned a few things. First of all, you can imagine how much your expectations determine what you feel, what you see, what you hear. It is hard for reality to correct your imagination. Secondly, you can imagine how hard it is to learn something really new, something that escapes my anticipation, something that goes beyond my expectations and my pre-image of the world. And finally, we can understand as well why most people do not listen to others to understand, but to reply. It's hard to keep an open mindset. Understanding is predicting, but it's out of our control. One day I was invited by a colleague living in Cape Town, South Africa, and he said, could you come over and give a lecture on anxiety? I said, okay, it's fine. This was a long trip. And he said, well, let's have a good glass of red wine. I will invite you at my house. I went to his house. He went to the cellar. His wife was gone. I don't know what's he doing, but anyway, he was looking for the best bottle of red wine. And I was wondering, just walking around his study, and suddenly, at the left side in the room, I noticed at a side table, like an empty box of glass, like an aquarium, but without any cover. Within the aquarium was sand, and there were some traces in the sand. And in front of the glass box, there was a card with letters, and it said, King Cobra. And at that moment, I just looked at the ground, at the ceiling, behind the curtains. I was really scared. But why? Suppose that Mr. Spock was here, the Vulcan from Star Trek. What would he say? He would say, human being, why are you afraid? The only thing I see as a rational being in reality is an empty box of glass, sand with traces, and a card that says King Cobra. You're right, Mr. Spock, but we are not Vulcans. We are humans. We create a story. We need a story because we want to live in a meaningful world. So what we do all the time as human beings is we anticipate the future, reality, with meaningful connections between things that I pick up outside in the world. Even if they're not related to each other, I build something because I want to make sense of it. Understanding is not a choice. It is not an option. Actually, it's an obligation. You have to understand. And gradually, while we talk about learning, we begin to understand anxiety. Human beings are anxious because they anticipate all the time. First, we create the world to make it meaningful, and then we try to escape it. And the more we are out of control, the harder we anticipate to get grip on reality. And the more we anticipate, we are trapped in our own imagination. And the harder it will be to get in touch again with reality. Not the world is dangerous. We are dangerous. Anxiety is always true, but every time a lie. So let's go back to the first question. Are we anxious to learn? Yes, we are. Learning is anxiety because during learning, We need to be uncomfortable. We are incompetent, insecure. We don't know what happens. We are out of control. Without anxiety, you cannot learn. But on the other hand, anxiety is learning as well, because at that unique moment of being anxious, you're confronted with the limits, the boundaries of your comfort zone, and you realize that you're at the verge of going beyond these boundaries to detect something really, really new that scares you. Anxiety is a unique moment of learning, an opportunity for learning. When a few years ago, I had this crazy idea, I was 50, that I would like to learn to act on stage, perform on stage. So I wrote a theater play. But I'm not a professional, so I couldn't. And each time that I went on stage, I was so scared, I was so anxious. And the director, I had a director, acting director, she said to me, well, maybe you should begin with walking on stage. Just walk on stage. No more and no less than yourself, just a human being. I mean, don't make it very difficult, a little bit more open and calm. Walk on stage, completely purposeless, but with a name like a real actor. And I tried, but I couldn't. I couldn't walk on stage. Here I was, Damiaan Denys, 50 years old, professor in psychiatry, head of the department, 3 children, and I couldn't even walk on stage. I had to learn to walk again, like a child. And then I remembered, what was the very first thing I learned in my life? Walking. Walking is the very first thing human beings learn. How many times have you been falling before you could walk? And eventually, I learned to walk on stage because I wanted to understand. I wanted to change myself as a person. I wanted to change the world. I said, learning is like running a marathon. No. No, it isn't. It is walking. Learning is just walking. No more and no less than being yourself. By the big blue sea on the beach with a cheeseburger. Just try it, walking, and you will see it will change you forever.